So, where are we in the current direwolf hype cycle, you might ask? And I'm afraid to say that we could be in dire straits. What you might not have seen is that as part of the overall direwolf press release, there was a smaller, sort of overlooked one that the media hasn't really dug into yet. And that was Colossal claiming to have cloned 4 red wolves. The direwolf claim is fantastical and is full of really interesting stuff that we can dig into. But the red wolf claim is a little more interesting to me because it sort of has more immediate real world implications for conservation that's happening in the US right now. Also, just to set the record straight, I personally think that the main thrust of the direwolf press release is baloney. There's really cool, amazing, groundbreaking stuff that is associated with it, but like the claim of what they've done is just like ridiculous. I guess like this is a really dumb analogy, but let's say a company comes out and says they've created like an anti-gravity device and they've also used it to send someone to the moon, and the person came back with moon rocks, and like then they got like a picture of like George Lucas holding the moon rocks, and they're like real moon rocks, and people are like, yo, can I like check those moon rocks out? Did you publish anything about them? They're like, nope. But then it turns out the anti-gravity device is real, but like then there's like zero evidence to support the fact that they actually went to the moon. So like everyone's like focusing on this crazy thing that they did with it, right? But they're like, the crazy thing is they made an anti-gravity device. So I think it's really it's a bad, terrible analogy, but it's similar with the direwolves. Like the claim that they de-extincted direwolves is just absolutely ridiculous on like every level. But the technology that they applied in this project is mind-blowing and groundbreaking. I think the issue here is a lot of folks are coming out and just being like, dude, I know it's baloney, but Colossal's not a baloney company. The other stuff they're doing is not baloney stuff. It's actually really good stuff. And they're going to use that baloney hype and that baloney money to go and do real non-baloney stuff. Why would you trust a company that is just like every single thing they say is baloney? Why would you trust that anything else they're going to do is also not going to be just like full-on baloney flavored? And so let's look at the Red Wolf project. Essentially, with the Red Wolf project, we're already kind of getting into this dire wolf territory where our idea of species as a category is already sort of thorny and nebulous. But like the way that it works is like different scientific groups can get together and debate species designations, and organisms sometimes move taxonomically. They can become different species as more information comes to light. So Colossal is sort of taken a look at how we do species and said, well, it's sort of complicated, so we're just going to say whatever we want as a species and just roll with that. I think one of the reasons we can't totally separate the direwolf hype away from the supposedly more legitimate projects is because these supposedly actual real good projects, they rest on sort of the philosophical and ethical things that Colossal has established with the direwolf project. So like really specifically with red wolves, there's like this whole idea of what is a red wolf as a species, and like how much is just of the genome is pure red wolf, how much is coyote, and like the red wolves that exist, like are they under threat from coyote hybridization? That's like a huge issue with red wolf reintroductions. And so the way that Colossal has approached this is they've taken hybrid coyotes and then they've created hybrid coyote clones, but they're sort of pitching it as having created red wolf clones. So like you can see how they're like already going at this like the most controversial way possible. To like give them the benefit of the doubt, I think what they're claiming they're doing is they're going out and finding coyotes that have hybridized red wolf genes, and then going and like collecting those coyotes and then like preserving those genes so that in the future those genes could be like reinserted back into the gene pool to help with diversity, like if there's a genetic bottleneck. But again, like we haven't seen like papers showing that the coyotes that they captured had like any certain percentage of red wolf genes, and they also haven't shown that the genes that they have are sort of like unique to these coyotes and that they aren't already in the red wolf population. And in fact, like one of the only papers that I can find on these hybrid coyotes suggests that the red wolf genes that are present in coyotes were similar to genes that are present in the known red wolf population. And of course, just like all of that aside, if you delete a species habitat and then de-extinct it, like where do you expect it to live? How can it go out into the wild and reproduce and grow a population? The biggest issue with red wolves isn't genetic diversity. The biggest issue is threats from humans and simply lack of human motivation to protect them and create space for them to live. Another big concern with Colossal's marketing approach is that the current administration, who is actively trying to undermine protected species and to threaten habitat for protected species, they are coming out and saying like, hey, this is great. Like, if you actually care about species, like if we end up extincting them, you can just bring them back. Like, I think Burgum, the Secretary of the Interior, is like, yeah, just call up Colossal. So like this whole attitude that essentially technology and innovation can save us, when it's just really clear, like everyone that's in conservation is like, it doesn't matter if we don't have habitat. I think it's just like not a good narrative to be creating right now, especially when the narrative just so much of it is predicated on baloney. And again, like, this isn't to take away from like the really serious accomplishments that Colossal has done, like absolutely mind-blowing stuff. But like, again, going back to my really stupid analogy of like the anti-gravity company, it's like, focus on the anti-gravity. Like, I can't believe you guys made that. Why are you concocting this huge malarkey narrative that you sent someone to the moon? They say we live in a post-truth era. I like to think the scientific community is being more about intersubjectivity than truth. If I observe something over here, can you replicate that observation over there? And maybe together, can we try to figure out why we observed what we observed? Regardless of how mind-blowing Colossal's breakthroughs are, I think their baloney-style communication and their real loose cannon approach and lack of cooperation with other scientific bodies is a red flag at best. And at worst, I think could really limit how helpful they could actually be for conservation programs in the long term.